This story begins with a dog, wounded, abandoned, and tied to a tree like he didn't matter. But someone saw him. A little girl with more courage than most adults, and a heart big enough to reach through fear and pain. What followed wasn't just a rescue, it was the beginning of healing for an entire family. If you believe in stories that break, then mend, then stay with you long after the screen fades, please like, subscribe, and stay close. What you're about to see might just remind you that even the most broken hearts can find their way home. The frost clung stubbornly to the brittle blades of grass, casting a silvery sheen over the small town of Willow Creek. Nestled in the quieter hills of Oregon, the town stirred slowly in the pale blue of early morning. It was late February, and winter hadn't quite loosened its grip. The air was sharp, the sky heavy with thin white clouds stretching across the sleepy sun. Children hadn't yet filled the halls of Willow Creek Elementary, which sat quietly on the edge of town, its red brick facade tucked against the foot of a small hill blanketed in sleeping oak trees. A narrow path wound behind the school, flanked by a crooked wooden fence and scattered pine cones. Harper May Whitlock, just shy of 10, was already wide awake. She had always been the kind of child who moved with quiet purpose, curious but careful, brave but never loud. With long brown hair usually tied into a lopsided braid and her sneakers always scuffed, Harper was a small girl with wide gray eyes that saw more than she ever said out loud. She had a tendency to wander when the world felt too still, often with her canvas backpack slung over one shoulder and her trusty green pocketknife tucked beside a granola bar and a journal full of pencil sketches. This morning, Harper had left 15 minutes earlier than usual, not because she was late, but because her dreams had been restless. She hadn't told her mother, Rachel, that the dreams had been filled with wind and barking, or that she'd woken with her heart pounding like she had forgotten something important. The air bit gently at her cheeks as she made her way along the back trail behind the school, the cold seeping through her cotton gloves. And then she saw it. At first, she thought it was part of a fallen tree trunk, or maybe a pile of coats someone had left. But as she drew closer, her footsteps slowed. The shape was hunched, still, and trembling slightly. It was a dog, a large one. Bigger than any Harper had seen up close. A German shepherd, thick-furred and broad-shouldered, his coat a deep black and rust mix that glistened faintly with frost. His eyes were an amber shade, too old and weary for the body they sat in. He was tied, tight, against the base of a tree. A thick rope wound around his chest and legs, cinched so close it pressed into the skin, revealing subtle indentations through the fur. A paper note fluttered slightly, taped to the trunk above his head. Harper could see the words bleeding through the lined paper, written in blocky black marker. His name is Maximus. I can't keep him. Please be kind. The dog growled low when she stepped within a few feet, his body tensing as his tail tucked tighter. But Harper didn't move any closer, not yet. She dropped to a crouch in the frozen grass and simply watched him. Her breath came out in white clouds. The wind rustled the trees around them, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke and pine needles. Hey, she whispered, voice barely a sound. It's okay. I see you. The dog didn't growl again. His ears were rigid, eyes locked on hers, but the fear was louder than the threat. His body was shaking, not from aggression, but exhaustion. There was a wound along his hind leg, shallow but raw, as though he tried to free himself and failed. Harper sat there a minute longer, then slowly slipped off her backpack. She unzipped the front pocket and took out the small green knife, nothing fancy, just the kind with a fold-out serrated edge her mother had given her for their backyard camping nights. Only for emergencies, Rachel had said. Harper figured this counted. She moved with the same carefulness she used when catching moths in summer, every movement deliberate, soft. The rope was thick, and stiff with cold. She crept in close enough to smell the musk of wet fur and fear, and for a moment, the dog flinched. But he didn't growl. His eyes were no longer defiant, they were pleading. Like he had run out of choices and knew it. Maximus, she said softly, testing the name. It didn't sound scary when she said it. It sounded noble. She worked the blade between the knots. It wasn't easy. The rope was knotted by someone who either didn't know what they were doing, or someone who very much did. As the blade slipped under one loop, Harper whispered, "You're not going to hurt me, are you?" The dog blinked slowly, and for a moment, Harper felt like he answered with silence. When the last knot came free, Maximus didn't bolt. He just slumped sideways like his legs forgot they belonged to him. Harper caught herself with one hand in the grass, heart racing, then looked at him. He was big. Even collapsed, his size was intimidating. But he wasn't dangerous. She stayed beside him, not reaching out yet. Just being there. She knew better than to touch a creature who hadn't asked for it. From behind the fence, a squirrel darted up a tree. A bird called once from the bare branches above. The world was quiet again, as if holding its breath. The bell from the school chimed faintly, a reminder that the rest of the town was waking up. But Harper didn't move. Maximus lifted his head slightly, just enough to look at her. There was something ancient in his eyes, like he had lived through storms no one else had seen. "You're not going back there," Harper said, her voice steady. "You're coming with me." And so she stood, brushing off her knees, and held out the rope, now slack and harmless, like a leash. Maximus didn't move at first. But when she took a step away, he pulled himself upright with effort, legs trembling. He limped, slightly, but followed her. They moved slowly together down the hill, the frost crunching beneath their feet. Harper kept looking over her shoulder to make sure he was still there. Maximus followed with his head low, tail dragging, but no longer tied to anything except the quiet gravity of the girl in front of him. Behind them, the wind stirred the paper note loose. It danced once in the air before catching on a branch, stuck halfway between abandonment and memory. Harper walked slowly, adjusting her steps to match Maximus's limp. The morning fog hadn't lifted, and the narrow sidewalks of Willow Creek still glistened with cold. She led the large German shepherd through the side gate of her house, careful not to make the hinges squeal. The Whitlock home sat quietly at the end of Maple Street, its white paint slightly chipped and shutters faded to a dull blue. A modest house with a single-car garage, it belonged to people who lived simply and carried more memories than decorations. Harper's mind raced. The garage wasn't warm, but it was private. A place her mom rarely checked unless something broke. She opened the creaky door just wide enough for Maximus to squeeze in, then gently pulled it shut behind them. "Okay," she whispered, kneeling beside him, "this is temporary." Maximus sniffed the concrete floor, then curled into the corner behind an old folded treadmill and two dusty crates of Christmas lights. He didn't whimper or bark. He simply lay down, his thick body forming a tired crescent against the wall. Harper ran her fingers through the rough fur behind his ear. "Just for a little while. Till I figure this out." Inside the house, Rachel Whitlock was asleep, finally. Tall and lean with deep lines etched around her mouth, Rachel carried herself with the weight of someone who had been strong for too long. Her hair, once auburn, was now streaked with gray and always tied up in a messy bun. A nurse at St. Joseph's Oncology Unit, she worked long nights filled with 4 pumps, hushed tears, and patients who sometimes didn't wake up again. The loss of her husband 2 years earlier had turned Rachel into someone quieter. Michael Whitlock, a local police officer, had died in a car accident responding to a winter crash just outside of town. Since then, Rachel had thrown herself into work, often skipping meals, often forgetting birthdays, including her own. She loved Harper fiercely, but grief made her distant, and exhaustion made her brittle. That morning, she had gotten home at 5 a.m., left her scrubs in the laundry basket, and collapsed into bed with a dull ache behind her eyes. She hadn't noticed the faint scent of wet dog that clung to Harper's hoodie. Meanwhile, Harper returned to the garage during recess and after school, sneaking scraps from the fridge, leftover meatloaf, a slice of cheddar, apple slices. Maximus accepted them gratefully but gently. He didn't beg. He didn't bark. He seemed to understand secrecy was his only currency now. That Friday, while Harper was checking on Maximus, the garage door opened suddenly. Light spilled in like a tidal wave, and Maximus jerked upright. Harper's stomach dropped. Rachel stood in the doorway, still in her gray sweatpants and oversized hoodie, holding a mug of tea. Her face was blank, and for a full second, no one spoke. "Harper," she said slowly, eyes shifting from her daughter to the massive creature huddled beside the paint cans. "What is that?" Harper stood frozen, mouth parted, the green pocketknife still in her jacket. I found him. Behind the school. He was tied up. There was a note." Rachel blinked. "You brought home a stray German shepherd. And hid it? In the garage?" "He's not mean," Harper rushed out. "He didn't bite or anything. He was so scared, Mom. He was tied to a tree. Tight. He couldn't even stand up." Rachel stared at Maximus again. The dog didn't growl. Didn't move. Just watched her with steady, amber eyes. Rachel's jaw clenched slightly, she had seen those eyes before. In patients who had accepted their fate. She stepped forward, slowly, crouched, set her mug down on the cement. "You're not hurt?" she asked Harper. "No," Harper said. "He wouldn't hurt anyone." Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples. "You can't just bring animals home, Harper. What if he's dangerous? What if someone's looking for him?" "There was a note," Harper repeated. "It said his name is Maximus. And that they couldn't keep him. That we should be kind." Something in that last sentence snagged in Rachel's chest. She looked at the dog again. Maximus hadn't taken his eyes off Harper. His body was still, submissive, but not broken. Rachel sat back on her heels. "We'll need to take him to the vet. See if he's chipped. And he can't stay in the garage forever." Harper lit up, eyes wide. "You're not mad?" "I'm tired," Rachel muttered. "But I'm not heartless. Just, don't feed him anything spicy, and don't let him near the cat food." "We don't have a cat," Harper said. "Exactly." That night, Rachel called her friend Evelyn, who worked part-time at the Willow Creek Animal Clinic. Evelyn was short, round-cheeked, and always wore earrings shaped like animals. Today's were flamingos. She agreed to see Maximus first thing in the morning. By dawn, Maximus sat quietly in the back seat of Rachel's dusty Subaru, Harper beside him with both hands in his fur. Evelyn met them at the clinic's back entrance and led them into a side room. "He's a big one," she commented, running a practiced eye over Maximus's frame. "Male, intact, German shepherd. Probably 4 or 5 years old. Looks like he's been underfed for a while." She scanned him. No microchip. No tags. No record. "Well," Evelyn said, scribbling on a clipboard, "it looks like whoever had him before didn't care enough to register him. That's good news for you, if you want to keep him." Rachel looked at Harper, who was already sitting on the floor, Maximus curled beside her like they'd done this for years. "Let's see how this week goes," Rachel said. "He's still a guest." As they drove home, Harper glanced at her mom, then at Maximus. Her mom's fingers were white on the steering wheel. Her jaw tight again. "You okay?" Harper asked. Rachel nodded. "Yeah. Just tired. Some nights are harder than others." There was a pause, and then she added, "There was a man last night, lung cancer. His wife sat beside him all night, holding his hand. Said he used to have a German shepherd. Kept a picture in his wallet for 20 years. Harper didn't answer. She just leaned gently against Maximus, her hand resting between his ears. That night, Rachel left a blanket out in the laundry room and set a bowl of water beside it. Maximus settled there without complaint. Before bed, Harper peeked in. He was already asleep, legs twitching slightly like he was chasing something in his dreams. She knelt beside him. "You're safe now, okay?" she whispered. "But just for now. We'll figure out forever later." And Maximus, giant and scarred and oddly gentle, let out a slow, steady sigh. It rained hard that Wednesday. The sky was a thick sheet of pewter and the wind howled against the windows of the Whitlock house like it wanted in. Thunder grumbled above Willow Creek in long, trembling waves, the kind that seemed to rattle from the rooftops down into your bones. The storm hadn't been forecasted, but it had arrived with the suddenness of a slammed door, drenching the little town in cold sheets of water that turned sidewalks into rivers and rooftops into drums. Inside the house, Harper sat at the kitchen table with a workbook spread open before her. Her pencil tapped nervously in the margin of a half-finished math problem, but her attention kept drifting toward the laundry room door. Just beyond it, Maximus lay on the folded quilt Rachel had left for him. His head was resting on his front paws, ears perked slightly every time a new crack of thunder broke the silence. He'd been with them for 5 days. In that short time, Harper and Maximus had built a rhythm. He followed her into the hallway in the morning, waited at the door when she brushed her teeth, and lay beside her while she drew in her sketchbook on the living room floor. He never barked, not unless someone came to the door. Then he let out a soft, deliberate woof, low and guarded, as if announcing he was here, just in case. Rachel noticed. She didn't say much, but Harper saw the way her mom paused longer in the hallway now, listening. And at night, Rachel sometimes peeked into the laundry room when she thought Harper wasn't watching. The storm had pushed everything into stillness. Classes were cancelled. Streets were empty. Even the birds had gone silent. Rachel, who usually worked the Wednesday night shift at St. Joseph's, had called out for the first time in months. She sat on the couch now, feet tucked beneath her, a blanket over her lap and her tablet dim in her hands. She wasn't reading. Just staring at the storm. Rachel's face in that moment was all edges, cheekbones too prominent from skipped meals, eyebrows pinched in thought. But Harper noticed something new: she wasn't just tired. She was, somewhere else. Caught in a memory maybe. The kind that slips in during thunder. Harper walked to the kitchen counter and poured water into a mug. She turned just as a bright flash of lightning split the sky. The lights flickered. Maximus let out a sharp yelp, scrambled to his feet, and bolted through the half-closed laundry door into the hallway. Harper dropped the mug. Maximus skidded across the wooden floor, claws clicking wildly. He turned once, disoriented, and dove under the table, pressing himself flat against the wall. Harper rushed to him, heart pounding. He wasn't barking. He was shaking. His entire body trembled like a live wire. "Shoo. You're okay," she whispered, crawling in beside him. Rachel stood frozen across the room, her blanket sliding to the floor. What was that? Harper looked up. The thunder scared him. He didn't mean to. He ran through the house. Rachel snapped, the sharpness in her voice a whip crack. "He's a big dog, Harper. What if he knocked something over? What if he bit you?" "He wouldn't," Harper said softly, hugging Maximus's neck. He was scared. That's all. But Rachel's breathing had changed. Her hands were clenched at her sides, and for a moment, Harper thought she might yell. She didn't. Instead, she turned away, rubbing her eyes. The tension hung between them, heavy and wet like the storm outside. Then came a sound Harper didn't expect, soft, muffled sniffling. Not from her. From Maximus. She looked down. His eyes were squeezed shut, and a whimper rattled out of his chest like something buried deep had cracked open. Harper felt her own tears coming. Not because she was afraid, but because he was. She pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "It's okay. I've got you." Rachel turned back. She saw them then, girl and dog tangled on the floor, two souls made of the same quiet ache. Maximus looked up, met her gaze for a moment, then pressed his head into Harper's lap and stayed there. The silence stretched. Rachel sighed. Her voice, when it came again, was quieter. He's housebroken. Harper nodded. He's been eating okay. Another nod. Rachel ran a hand through her hair. All right. He can stay. Her voice cracked slightly. But just for now. Until we figure out what to do next. Harper smiled through her tears. Thank you. And, Rachel added, we need to give the shelter our number. Just in case someone is actually looking for him. Harper hesitated, but nodded again. Okay. Later that night, Harper wrote Maximus on the top of a sheet of paper and began making a list: food, shampoo, leash, maybe one of those chewy bones from the store downtown. Maximus had curled up beside her bed. He still flinched at distant thunder, but not as much. She reached down and brushed her hand over his back. He made a soft sound and stretched, pressing closer. From the hallway, Rachel watched them a moment longer before walking back to her room. She passed a small framed photo on the wall, Michael in his K-9 unit uniform, one hand resting on the back of a German shepherd that looked eerily like Maximus. Same strong frame, same deep eyes. She paused, let her fingers brush the frame lightly. Then she turned out the light. The following week, the storm gave way to clearer skies, and Willow Creek emerged from its soaked silence. The roads dried, the clouds thinned, and a fragile warmth returned to the late winter air. Mornings remained crisp, but sunbeams filtered through Rachel's kitchen window once more, falling across the table like threads of gold. Maximus had adjusted quickly. He no longer flinched at every sound, though certain things still made him freeze: the creak of old metal, heavy boots on wooden floors, the sharp clang of dropped objects. But he had stopped trembling in his sleep. He didn't whimper at night. Instead, he had taken to sleeping outside Harper's bedroom door, curled like a quiet sentry. And Rachel noticed. He had also begun something else, something unexpected. Every morning, at exactly 6:15, Rachel would find Maximus sitting silently in the hallway, waiting. Not for food. Not for Harper. For her. The first time it happened, she blinked in confusion. But when it continued every morning, even weekends, she found herself greeting him softly without thinking. "Morning, big guy," she whispered on Thursday as she passed him in her robe. He wagged his tail once, low and calm, and followed her to the kitchen. It was subtle, this new rhythm, but Rachel could feel it. She wasn't sure when it had begun to feel normal, but it had. That Saturday, she decided to take him back to the clinic for a more thorough checkup. Evelyn was waiting for them. The vet was in her mid-40s, short and compact with a streak of neon purple in her otherwise salt-and-pepper hair. She wore jeans under her white coat and always had a silver whistle dangling from a lanyard shaped like a squirrel. Well, look who's back," she said as Maximus trotted through the door, tail slightly raised now, body more confident than last time. "You look 10 pounds less worried." Rachel smiled slightly. "He's doing better. But I want to make sure we didn't miss anything." Evelyn nodded and led Maximus to the back room. As she examined him, she spoke calmly, her hands gentle but practiced. "No chip, like before. Teeth are in decent shape. No ticks or infections. But," she paused, her hand brushing across Maximus's side. "There's scarring under the fur. Here, along the ribs. And along the inner thigh." Rachel frowned. "What kind of scarring?" Evelyn looked up. "Old bruises. Repeated pressure. Looks like he was bound, tight and often. He's healed, but it wasn't kind." Rachel's throat tightened. Maximus shifted but didn't resist. His eyes were open, steady, as if he already knew everything being said and had come to terms with it long ago. "He's not aggressive," Evelyn added, "which surprises me, given the signs." Usually dogs with trauma like this either shut down, or lash out. Rachel nodded slowly. He follows me around. Waits for me in the mornings. Evelyn smiled gently. Then he trusts you. That's not small. Back at home, Rachel found herself watching Maximus more carefully. At night, while Harper did her homework and the house settled into its quiet creaks and hums, Rachel noticed the way Maximus sat by the front door, alert but relaxed, as if guarding something sacred. The third night in a row, she sat on the couch longer just to watch him. Harper, noticing, slid beside her. He waits until I fall asleep before lying down, she said softly. He walks the hallway sometimes, like he's checking everything. Rachel nodded. Like he did it before. Harper looked up at her. Did Dad ever talk about the dogs he worked with? Rachel hesitated. Not much. But I remember his partner was a shepherd named Juno. He used to say she could smell a lie better than he could. Harper smiled. Maybe Maximus smells sadness. Rachel chuckled under her breath. Then he must be overloaded in this house. That night, after Harper had gone to bed, Rachel stayed up late answering emails. She heard Maximus's paws tap down the hallway, then felt his body settle on the floor beside her chair. She looked down. His eyes were closed, ears relaxed. Just resting near her. Something in her chest shifted. You get attached to quiet things, she whispered, unsure if she was talking to herself or him. He didn't move. But she kept talking anyway. My husband used to say grief is just love with nowhere to go. Maybe you've been carrying that too, huh? In the weeks that followed, Rachel found herself talking to Maximus more. Short comments in the morning. Thoughts out loud in the laundry room. A gentle, "You okay?" when he flinched at a passing motorcycle. And he listened. That's what struck her the most. He listened like he understood the weight of every word. She began calling him "big guy" without thinking. It fit. He was huge, easily over 90 pounds, but he moved with gentleness, like someone who knew the value of stillness. One morning, as she reached for her travel mug, she saw Maximus already sitting beside the door. You coming with me? She asked, surprised. He just tilted his head. She knelt and scratched behind his ear. Not yet, big guy. But maybe someday. She left the door open longer than usual, just so he could watch her leave. It began with a distant wail. The night was unusually warm for early March, and the windows were cracked just enough to let in the scent of damp earth and budding pine. The moon, a pale silver coin in the sky, cast long shadows across the living room floor. Rachel had just turned in for the night, and Harper had fallen asleep on her back, one hand dangling over the side of the bed where Maximus rested, his breathing slow and steady. Then the siren blared. Not close, but not far either, high-pitched, urgent, unmistakable. It was coming from the old middle school down the hill, where a faulty alarm system had a habit of screaming awake the entire neighborhood once every few months. The sound hit Maximus like a whip. He jerked upright, ears flattened, eyes wild with panic. His limbs scrambled beneath him, paws slipping on the wooden floor as he tried to find shelter that no longer existed. Harper sat up instantly, startled. Maximus? But he wasn't listening. He crashed into the doorframe, pushing himself into the hallway, barking once, loud and sharp, then whining as he threw his weight into the laundry room door, the place he had once called safety. Rachel's feet were on the floor before her mind caught up. She rushed out of her room, robe half open, heart pounding. She found Maximus curled tightly behind the dryer, his body wedged in, shoulders trembling, teeth bared not in aggression, but in pure, animal terror. Harper was crouched nearby, calling his name gently, voice cracking. It's okay, it's just a sound, please don't be scared. Rachel dropped to her knees, ignoring the cold floor, and reached for him. He flinched. She stopped, held her hands in the air. It's not real, she whispered. Not anymore. You're safe. Her voice was steadier than she expected. She inched closer, then laid one hand on his shoulder. Maximus stiffened, then let out a broken sound, half growl, half sob, and pressed his body tighter to the wall. It was Harper who made the difference. She crawled behind Rachel, wrapped her arms around Maximus's neck, and rested her forehead against his. "He thinks it's happening again," she murmured. "Whatever it was." Rachel ran her hand along his spine, slow and steady, like petting a memory. "Then let him know we're here now." Eventually, his breathing slowed. The siren faded. Silence returned like an afterthought, like an apology. Later that night, Harper couldn't sleep. She sat on the floor outside the laundry room, a blanket wrapped around her, sketchbook in her lap. She began to draw Maximus, not how he had looked tonight, but how he looked in the mornings when he waited for Rachel, ears slightly perked, the soft strength in his eyes. Footsteps creaked outside. She looked up to find Rachel speaking quietly with someone on the porch. Curious, Harper slipped closer to the front hallway. The door was ajar, and through the thin opening, she could see the neighbor, Mr. Lawson. He was in his 60s, tall and stooped, with a salt-white beard and a deep voice that moved like gravel. He had lived 2 houses down since Harper was born. Rachel rarely spoke to him except for polite nods, but tonight, she leaned against the doorframe, tired eyes rimmed with sleepless worry. "You know," Mr. Lawson was saying, "dogs don't just react like that unless they've been through something. Real trauma. Military, maybe. Or worse." Rachel nodded slowly. "We don't know his story. Just, found him tied to a tree. He rubbed the back of his neck. That one's been through fire. You can see it." Then his voice lowered. "You still thinking of leaving, Rachel?" Harper's breath caught. Rachel didn't answer right away. "I was," she admitted. "Right after Michael died, everything felt wrong. Like the walls had changed shape. You wanted to run. I wanted Harper to have something new. Something that didn't smell like grief. But you didn't." Rachel shook her head. "I packed the boxes. Even called a realtor. But then, life. Work. Bills. Time passed." Mr. Lawson's voice softened. "Maybe staying was the braver choice." There was a long pause before Rachel replied, "Or maybe I was just scared to start over again." The conversation drifted to softer tones, and Harper stepped back, heart pounding, thoughts swirling. She didn't know they had almost moved. She didn't know her mother had been that close to walking away from everything. She wondered how many other things had stayed unspoken between them. Back in her room, Harper stared at the ceiling. Maximus was still curled behind the dryer, not quite ready to leave the shadows. She didn't blame him. Some wounds weren't meant to be exposed all at once. In the morning, the sun came early, bright and bold like it was trying to erase the night. Maximus padded slowly into the kitchen, tail low, eyes cautious but aware. Rachel was already at the counter, pouring coffee. He walked toward her, paused, then sat. "Morning, big guy," she said, her voice gentler than usual. He pressed his nose into her leg. She didn't flinch. She knelt down, touched his face with both hands. "You okay?" Maximus didn't answer, but he didn't move away. Harper entered quietly, watching the scene from the doorway. Her eyes caught Rachel's for a second, something passed between them. Not words. Just understanding. And that day, for the first time, Maximus followed Rachel all the way to the front porch as she left for work. He watched her go. Then turned back inside, where Harper was already pouring his food. The wind had shifted. It was the kind of wind that no longer bit at your skin but kissed it with a hint of spring. The morning sky was cloudless, soaked in soft gold and streaks of lavender, and Willow Creek stirred with the sounds of slow bicycles, a distant lawnmower, and children's laughter from nearby porches. Harper stood at the bottom of the familiar hill, a place that only a few weeks ago had been just another backdrop to her walk to school. But today, the slope above her carried weight. Memory. She tightened her grip on Maximus's leash, not because he needed control, but because it felt like holding on to something solid. He stood beside her, tall and still, his coat glossy under the sun. The scars beneath the fur were hidden now, but Harper knew where they were. She had memorized them like a secret map, a story that hadn't needed words. "Come on, big guy," she said quietly. The hill wasn't steep, but their steps were slow. Maximus's stride was steady, no longer limping, though he still scanned the woods like he expected the past to leap out from between the trees. Harper didn't speak as they climbed. Her backpack, slung over both shoulders, was unusually full today. She had spent the night before carefully choosing what to bring: one photo, one piece of paper, one blue marker. The tree came into view the way ghosts do, quietly, without drama, just waiting. It was still there, of course. Gnarled and weathered, bark split from years of storm and frost, a rusted nail jutting from one side where someone long ago had tacked up a missing cat poster. To anyone else, it was just another old tree. But to Harper, and now Maximus, it was the place where everything changed. She crouched beside the base, brushing away fallen leaves. Her fingers found the soft earth, damp but warm. She unzipped her backpack, pulled out the photo, a printout from her mom's phone, slightly grainy. In it, Maximus lay sleeping, his head in Harper's lap, one of her arms flung loosely over his massive back. They looked like two puzzle pieces someone had finally figured out how to fit together. She placed the photo at the base of the tree and weighed it down with a flat stone. Then she took out the folded paper and smoothed it against her knee. In neat, blocky letters, she had written: "His name is Maximus. He has found his home. And his family is us." She added a small heart beneath it. Then, without hesitation, she tucked the note under the photo. Maximus stood beside her the whole time, his gaze not on the paper but on her. Harper reached up and scratched behind his ears. "You don't belong to the past anymore," she whispered. Behind them, footsteps crunched on gravel. Harper turned to find an older woman approaching from the side path. She wore a wide-brimmed straw hat and a forest green gardening vest over a plaid shirt. Her face was deeply lined, but her eyes were warm and curious. "Morning," the woman said with a nod, stopping a few feet away. "Didn't mean to startle you." "It's okay," Harper replied, standing up slowly. Maximus didn't bark, but his ears tilted forward, alert. The woman tilted her head at the tree. "Used to bring my grandkids up here. Hide and seek, mostly. That tree was always base." Harper smiled faintly. "It's kind of important to us." The woman studied Maximus. "Handsome boy. Looks like he's come a long way." "He has," Harper said. "We both have." The woman nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I'll let you two be. It's good to see young people caring so much. World needs more of that." She wandered off, leaving the scent of peppermint and lilacs trailing behind her. Harper and Maximus stood in silence a moment longer. Then Harper looked back at the note. "I think you saved me as much as I saved you," she said. They left the hill together, moving slowly, the tree growing smaller behind them with each step, but never distant. Back home, Rachel stood at the kitchen counter, her phone open beside a half-empty mug of coffee. Her hair was still damp from the shower, pulled back into a low bun, and her nurse scrubs had been swapped for a soft gray sweater and jeans. On the screen was an email confirmation. Her application for a position at the clinic's daytime shift had been accepted. Starting next month, her nights would no longer be spent under flickering fluorescent lights and the echo of 4 pumps. She would be home, awake, when Harper got off the bus. She would be there for dinners, homework help, and walks with Maximus. Rachel exhaled, closed the laptop, and looked out the window. She saw Harper and Maximus walking up the front path. The way Maximus moved now, it wasn't defensive or wary. It was purposeful. Confident. His eyes scanned the horizon like a guardian, not a fugitive. When they reached the porch, Harper looked up and saw her mom waiting at the door. "We went back," she said. Rachel stepped outside, arms crossed against the spring breeze. "How was it?" Harper shrugged. "It was okay. I think he needed to see it one more time." Rachel nodded. "Sometimes we all do." Harper tilted her head. "Did you ever go back to where you met Dad?" Rachel blinked at the question, then smiled faintly. "Once. It was at a county fair. He spilled mustard on my jeans and tried to clean it with a corndog napkin." Harper laughed. Rachel stepped aside to let them in. Maximus entered first, tail swishing once, then again, as he passed the doorway. Later that evening, Harper wrote in her journal. "Today, we went back to the tree. But it didn't feel like the place where things ended anymore. It felt like the place where we began." The days began to stretch longer, soaking the neighborhood in warm light that lingered well past dinner. Spring had crept fully into Willow Creek, covering yards in soft green, trees in early bloom, and sidewalks with chalk drawings that meandered like thoughts. The Whitlock house looked the same from the outside, white with blue trim, porch rails in need of paint, but inside, something had shifted. There was laughter now, and warmth that stayed even when the lights went out. Maximus had become more than a houseguest. He had become a fixture, a sentinel who waited at the door when Rachel left for work, and who padded down the hallway each night to check if Harper was still safely asleep. In the mornings, he lay under the kitchen table, one massive paw crossed over the other, head resting between them like a monk at prayer. But more than that, he had become something unspoken, a connection that neither Rachel nor Harper had realized they needed. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Rachel brewed 2 mugs of tea and sat across from Harper at the dining table. The windows were open, letting in the scent of cut grass and the faint echo of a bicycle bell from down the block. Maximus dozed nearby, twitching now and then, his ears flicking lazily at flies that weren't really there. Rachel stirred her tea with a spoon for longer than necessary. "I was thinking," she said finally, "about your dad." Harper looked up, surprised. Rachel didn't usually bring him up, not because she didn't care, but because it hurt too much. It was like pressing on a bruise you hadn't realized was still healing. "He worked with a dog, right?" Harper asked gently. Rachel nodded. "Juno." She was a female shepherd, smaller than Maximus, but sharp. The kind of dog that could sense when something was about to go wrong. Harper's eyes drifted to Maximus. "Was Dad like that too?" Rachel smiled, a faraway expression softening her features. "In some ways. He didn't talk much, not about work at least. But I remember the way he treated Juno. Like she was more than a partner. Like she was family." She paused, then leaned forward, resting her arms on the table. "The day he died, it was snowing. He was responding to a call, a highway pileup during a blizzard. Someone had driven off the road. He lost control of the car. By the time backup arrived, it was too late." Harper didn't speak. She reached out and took Rachel's hand. Rachel squeezed back. Juno survived the crash. She was in the back seat, in her harness. She had a broken leg, but she recovered. "What happened to her?" Harper whispered. "She was retired. Lived with another officer and his family. But I think, part of her never really healed." She looked toward Maximus. "Sometimes I see that same look in him. Like he's seen things he can't explain, but he still wakes up each morning and tries again." Harper blinked fast, willing back tears. "I used to think we couldn't keep him," Rachel continued. "Not because I didn't want to, but because I was scared. Scared of letting in something that might remind me too much of the past." "But he doesn't feel like the past anymore," Harper said softly. "He feels like, now. Maximus lifted his head then, as if responding to his name in thought. He rose, stretched slowly, and padded over to rest his chin on Rachel's knee. Rachel looked down, her eyes shining. "Hey, big guy," she murmured. "You sneaky bridge." That afternoon, they decided to take a walk together, a family walk. Rachel rarely had Sundays off, but with her new shift change officially approved, she had promised Harper more time. They wandered the neighborhood slowly, Maximus walking proudly at their side, leash loose, head high. At one point, a man across the street called out, "Nice shepherd." Rachel glanced over and offered a polite smile. The man, tall and broad-shouldered with a baseball cap pulled low, waved. "Had one just like him growing up. Best dog I ever had." Harper smiled, holding on to the leash a little tighter. "He's the best we've ever had too." They passed the park, then the fire station, where a young firefighter with a freckled face leaned against the brick wall, eating a sandwich. He grinned at Maximus. "That's a good-looking boy." Rachel smiled. "He is." The walk ended at the small footbridge that arched over Willow Creek itself, a slow-moving stream that glittered in the sun. They stopped there, watching the water ripple over stones, ducks drifting in lazy circles. "Can I tell you something weird?" Harper asked, leaning on the wooden rail. Rachel nodded. "I think Maximus knows Dad. I don't mean they met or anything. I think Dad would have loved him. And maybe that's why he fits here." Rachel took a deep breath, then placed an arm around Harper's shoulder. "I think you're right." They stood there a while, just watching the water, as Maximus lay at their feet, tail thudding softly against the wood every now and then, like he was affirming their presence with every beat. That evening, as dusk crept in, Rachel pulled an old photo album from the top of the closet. She and Harper sat side by side on the living room floor, flipping through pages of sun-faded snapshots. There was one of Michael in uniform, grinning at the camera with Juno beside him, tongue lolling, eyes bright. Harper traced the photo gently. "She looks like she smiled," she said. "She did," Rachel replied. So did he. Before things got heavy. Maximus came and lay beside them, resting his chin on Harper's foot. She leaned down and kissed the top of his head. "You're not a replacement," she whispered. "You're a continuation." And for the first time in a long time, Rachel didn't feel the need to correct her. The sun broke early over Willow Creek that morning, washing the rooftops in honeyed light and filling the sky with watercolor hues of apricot and blue. Spring had returned in full, grass growing faster than it could be mowed, robins nesting under porch eaves, and the town blooming with daffodils in every corner like confetti from the earth itself. The Whitlock house sat quietly at the edge of Maple Street, but its windows were open wide, curtains dancing with the breeze. In the living room, Harper was on her knees at the coffee table, tongue between her teeth in concentration. Her notebook, slightly crumpled at the corners, was open to a page titled in thick black ink, "My Hero." She had spent days thinking about what to write for Mrs. Bannon's end-of-year assignment, a personal essay about someone who changed your life. Some kids were writing about firefighters, grandmothers, favorite uncles, or teachers. Harper had considered writing about her dad, even about her mom. But every time her pencil touched the page, it drew a different face. One with amber eyes, a thick coat, and a quiet strength that held them all together. She paused and glanced toward the kitchen, where Rachel was packing a soft-sided carrier bag with treats, a collapsible water bowl, and a laminated ID badge. The badge read, "Maximus, Certified Therapy Dog. Willow Creek Rehabilitation Center. Handler, Rachel Whitlock, RN." It had been almost a year since the day Harper found Maximus tied to the base of that gnarled tree. In that time, scars had faded, on bodies, on hearts, and something new had taken root. Rachel, now working full-time day shifts, had found a new rhythm. Though she still carried shadows in her eyes, she laughed more often, sang to the radio while folding laundry, and made pancakes on Sundays shaped like animals that didn't always resemble what they were supposed to be. Maximus had blossomed. With patient training from a local program called Paws of Hope, run by a retired handler named Greg Latham, a wiry man in his 70s with sun-leathered skin, steel-gray hair, and a no-nonsense tone softened by warm eyes, Maximus had become a certified therapy dog. Greg had taken to Maximus quickly, recognizing his gentle spirit under the armor of his size. "He's got the heart," Greg had said during the final evaluation. "Doesn't matter what he's been through. He listens first. That's the rare kind." Since then, Maximus had made weekly visits to the rehab center. Rachel would walk in with him at her side, and the staff would pause whatever they were doing just to greet him. Patients, many of them elderly, recovering from surgery or stroke, brightened at the sound of his nails clicking on the floor. Maximus would rest his head gently on their knees, lie beside their wheelchairs, and sometimes close his eyes while someone told a story they hadn't shared in years. He didn't do tricks. He didn't need to. He simply stayed. "Mom," Harper called from the living room, lifting her notebook, "can I read it to you before you go?" Rachel walked over, brushing a curl behind Harper's ear. "Of course." Harper cleared her throat and began. Her voice, though soft at first, grew stronger with each line. "He wasn't supposed to be ours. He was tied to a tree with a note that said someone had given up. But I didn't. And he didn't. His name is Maximus, and he is my hero not because he saved my life in one big moment, but because he saves it quietly, every day. When I have bad dreams, he's there. When my mom is tired, he lays beside her. When we needed something to hold us together, he became that something without asking for anything in return. He doesn't speak, but I know what he means when he looks at me. I know he forgave whoever tied that knot. I hope one day, I can be as brave as him. He used to sleep in a garage. Now he walks hospital halls and makes people smile again. He's not just my dog. He's my family." Rachel blinked quickly, and then knelt to hug her daughter. Maximus, sensing something deep, stepped forward and placed his head gently on both their shoulders. "That's beautiful," Rachel whispered. "He'd be proud of you." "He already is," Harper replied, scratching behind Maximus's ears. That afternoon, after Rachel and Maximus had gone, Harper walked alone to the hill behind Willow Creek Elementary. The tree was still there, twisting skyward, now shaded by spring's full bloom. Grass grew wild around its roots, and the stone Harper had placed nearly a year ago still rested at the base, though the photo beneath it had faded from sun and rain. She had brought a new one. It was a glossy print, taken just last month by a volunteer photographer at the therapy center. It showed Maximus lying next to a woman in her 80s who was laughing so hard her eyes were closed, her wrinkled hand resting on his back. Maximus, ever composed, looked directly at the camera, as if to say, "See? I told you I belonged here." Harper gently slid the old paper aside, laid down the new photo, and tucked a fresh note beside it. "He found his place. We did too." The breeze moved through the trees, and Harper stood for a while in the sun, arms at her sides, heart light. Later that evening, she and Rachel met on the hill, bringing a blanket and a thermos of warm cider. Maximus trotted beside them, now so familiar with the path he didn't need a leash. They sat together as the sun sank low, lighting the sky with fire and lavender. Rachel leaned back on her elbows. "It's strange, isn't it? How life shifts." Harper nodded. "I used to think everything was about holding on. But maybe it's about letting things change." Maximus lay between them, his head on Harper's thigh, his breathing steady as ever. They watched the horizon together, three silhouettes against a sea of green. No longer defined by what they had lost, but by what they had chosen to grow in its place. And in that final moment, nothing needed to be said. They were whole. In the end, maybe it wasn't just fate that brought Harper and Maximus together, it was something greater. A quiet miracle wrapped in fur, sent at just the right moment to heal what words could not. Sometimes, God's blessings don't come with lightning or thunder. Sometimes, they arrive with soft eyes, steady paws, and a heart that simply refuses to give up on us. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the quiet miracles in your own life. Maybe you've met them. Maybe one is still waiting for you. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. Comment below with Amen if you believe that God still works in gentle, unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your thoughts, and may the Lord bless you and those you love.